Welcome to Imran Star Video, or as we call it, ISVI, the collaborative lens on Vancouver, unfiltered, unscripted, and powered by community. We're not just a voice behind the mic, we're a collective of creators, thinkers, storytellers, and city lovers coming together to spotlight the people, places, and energy that make Vancouver what it is. From coast mountain skylines to neon lit backstreets, we're covering everything from downtown buzz to the untold stories shaping our scene. You'll find us exclusively on YouTube, no algorithms, no filters, just real talk. For behind the scenes, updates, and chaotic brilliance in real time, follow us on TikTok and Instagram. So hit subscribe, drop a comment, and help us grow from 100 to 10, 0, and beyond. Because this isn't just our platform, it's yours too. Turn it up, get into it. Let's talk Vancouver. This is ISV. Once upon a time, Vancouver's buildings were about as colorful as its weather, which is to say, 50 shades of gray, and not the fun kind. Between the rain, the concrete, and the oddly aggressive condo design, the city was starting to look less like a West Coast art haven and more like the backdrop of a dystopian Netflix pilot. Enter the Vancouver Mural Festival, VMF. Stage left, spray cans loaded, mission ready, and absolutely done with beige. Started in 2016 by a group of art lovers, urban optimists, and probably at least one person who had just had enough, VMF set out to answer one very important question. What if we made the walls hot? But like, emotionally, artistically, culturally. And thus began a citywide glow-up that would turn Vancouver from Raincouver into a full-blown open-air gallery where every alley has attitude and every block has a story. The idea was simple but radical. Public art that doesn't sit behind velvet ropes, doesn't require a museum pass, and doesn't expect you to know what postmodern abstraction means. VMF was here to bring murals to the people, big, bold, unapologetic murals that celebrated culture, identity, and vibes. And Vancouver was ready. Tired of sterile sidewalks and Instagram feeds full of moody mountain shots, the city embraced VMF like a fresh pack of Crayolas in a beige office. Artists flooded the streets, paint buckets in hand, creating everything from towering portraits to trippy dreamscapes to visual love letters to entire neighborhoods. But VMF wasn't just a paint party for aesthetic's sake. It had purpose. It created platforms for underrepresented artists, turned neglected walls into symbols of pride, and made everyday commutes 1,000% more interesting. Suddenly, you couldn't walk to brunch without passing a psychedelic raccoon or a mural reminding you to decolonize your thinking in full Technicolor. In this piece, we'll explore how the Vancouver Mural Festival rose from a scrappy community project to a full-on cultural movement. We'll talk about its origins, its meteoric expansion, its spicy controversies, because of course there are some, and why even though its future may be shifting, its impact is painted all over the city, literally. So grab your reusable coffee cup, open your camera roll, and prepare to stand some walls. Because the VMF didn't just decorate Vancouver, it transformed it. Let's rewind to 2016, a time when Vancouver's vibe was less urban playground and more concrete corporate ennui with a splash of overpriced sushi. The city was growing faster than your TikTok algorithm, but culturally, let's just say the walls were screaming for help. Enter a small but mighty team of creatives who looked around at the endless blank walls and said, "You know what this place needs? A massive flaming tiger wearing a crown and maybe also a message about anti-capitalism." And just like that, the Vancouver Mural Festival, VMF, was born. Not out of some stuffy arts committee or government grant spreadsheet, but out of the radical belief that public art should actually be public. You shouldn't need a gallery pass or a background in interpretive dance to experience culture. Sometimes you just need a ladder, some spray paint, and a refusal to let your neighborhood look like a Soviet parking garage. The OG VMF team, a mix of artists, event planners, and probably at least one person who owned a drone, launched the first festival right in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Why there? Because Main Street was already home to vintage stores, craft breweries, and that one tattoo shop that somehow doubles as a zine distro. Basically, it had the audience. It just needed the walls to match the energy. The first festival featured 40 murals, one heck of a block party, and an open invitation for the entire city to pull up and vibe. The art ranged from surreal landscapes to massive portraits, political pieces, and graphic explosions that made your daily walk to the SkyTrain feel like a side quest in a creative RPG, and people loved it. Suddenly, alleys were destinations, blank walls were opportunities, and public space was no longer just something to walk past. It was something to interact with. From the jump, VMF wasn't trying to be neutral. It was colorful, loud, and a little rebellious. It gave underrepresented artists a 40-foot canvas and said, "Go off." It amplified indigenous voices, queer voices, and the voices of communities who were usually told to keep things low-key. And most importantly, it started conversations about art, gentrification, culture, and who actually gets to shape a city. So yeah, VMF didn't just decorate Vancouver, it disrupted it in the best possible way. It took a city obsessed with glass towers and real estate rankings and reminded it that walls can do more than hold up buildings. They can hold space, tell stories, and literally stop you in your tracks. Once the first Vancouver Mural Festival dropped in 2016 and left Mount Pleasant looking like the visual equivalent of a Spotify-wrapped playlist, colorful, bold, and deeply personal, the rest of the city took one look and said, "Wait, where's our rainbow koi dragon wrapped around a utility box?" What followed was a full-on art explosion. Like, we're talking public space glow-up levels not seen since someone put googly eyes on garbage cans. The VMF didn't just expand, it multiplied. Fast. From Main Street to Strathcona, from the downtown east side to the west end, murals began crawling across Vancouver like joyful, rebellious vines, spreading messages of justice, identity, resilience, and the occasional pop culture deep cut that made you stop mid-walk and say, "Is that Bob Ross riding a velociraptor?" Yes, yes it is. VMF scaled up like your favorite indie band before they went mainstream, but with less selling out and more community buy-in. They brought in artists from across Canada and around the world, turning Vancouver into a living mural gallery that refused to be confined by white cubes or silent halls. Every year, the festival dropped a new wave of art with the energy of a surprise album release, except instead of Spotify links, you got entire buildings that slapped. And when 2020 happened and the whole world went on lockdown, VMF pivoted harder than a startup trying to avoid bankruptcy. They introduced VMF Virtual, an interactive online mural map, and encouraged people to explore art through self-guided walking tours that screamed, "Hey, we're socially distancing, but make it aesthetic." The festival kept its foot on the gas, proving that public art doesn't just survive a pandemic, it thrives in one. But expansion wasn't just about location, it was about intention. VMF started commissioning year-round murals, offering paid opportunities for emerging artists, hosting workshops, and throwing the kind of all-ages block parties that made you forget how expensive this city is, for a few hours at least. They weren't just painting walls, they were building networks, careers, and literal cultural infrastructure. From sleepy alleys to high-traffic intersections, VMF turned the city's most ignored surfaces into platforms for bold expression. Suddenly, "Where should we meet?" became, "Which mural should we meet under?" And instead of relying on your phone to kill time while waiting for a bus, you could stare at a massive, hand-painted Tiger Girl hybrid holding a protest sign and think, "Wow, Art really said ACAB with color theory. So yeah, what started as a neighborhood experiment became a citywide movement. VMF didn't just scale up, it scaled loud. And in doing so, it redefined what public space could be, not just functional or clean, but meaningful, disruptive, and unmistakably alive. Let's be real. For a long time, public space in cities like Vancouver had all the cultural representation of a mayonnaise sandwich. A few statues of old white dudes, a mural of someone rowing a canoe in 1983, and maybe some decorative tile work if you were lucky. Yawn. But when the Vancouver Mural Festival, VMF, showed up with brushes, spray cans, and a mission to decolonize walls as hard as it decorates them, yeah, the game changed. From the jump, VMF made it clear. This wasn't about slapping pretty pictures on walls just for the gram. It was about amplifying voices, reflecting communities, and making sure the people walking past these murals every day could actually see themselves in them. That meant prioritizing Indigenous, BIPOC, LGBTQ+, disabled, immigrant, and historically silenced artists, and not just in a checkbox way, but in a here's a whole wall, now go paint your power kind of way. The result? Murals that didn't just make the city more colorful, they made it more honest. You had pieces confronting colonization, celebrating matriarchs, shouting about climate justice, embracing trans joy, and reflecting back the lived experiences of communities that had been side-eyed by public policy for decades. These weren't background visuals, they were emotional billboards, urban truth bombs, love letters, and rallying cries. One day, you'd be grabbing a coffee and look up to see a massive portrait of a local elder staring down from a 3-story building. The next, you'd walk by a wall exploding with vibrant, abstract depictions of queerness, care, or cultural resurgence, and suddenly you're feeling something in public on a Tuesday. Who gave this mural the right? VMF also made sure the artists got credit, support, and actual pay. Yes, revolutionary concept. Paying creatives. These weren't anonymous pieces left to fade in the rain. They were part of a curated, credited ecosystem that gave artists recognition, resources, and runway. And the impact didn't stop at the wall. These murals sparked conversation about gentrification, about what it means to exist in public space, about who Vancouver is for, and who gets erased. In a city often criticized for being cold, quiet, or emotionally unavailable unless drunk at a Canucks game, these murals brought some much-needed soul and vulnerability. In short, VMF gave the mic to the people and then made it 20 feet tall, painted it neon, and placed it directly in the middle of your commute. And that's exactly why it hit so hard. Because representation doesn't just belong in textbooks or think pieces, it belongs on the streets, in your face, woven into the visual fabric of your city. And thanks to VMF, Vancouver's walls finally started to speak in languages, stories, and styles that reflect the people who actually live here. Now, before we crown the Vancouver Mural Festival as the Beyoncé of urban revitalization, let's talk about the tea behind the paint. Because even the most vibrant wall art isn't immune to Vancouver's favorite pastimes: real estate drama, performative progress, and awkwardly skating around systemic issues with a soy latte in hand. Here's the hard truth. Not everyone saw murals and thought, "Yay, culture." Some saw them and thought, "Ah, yes, stage 1 of gentrification has arrived." And honestly, they're not wrong. Murals have this weird double-edged power. They beautify a space, bring in foot traffic, and boost community pride. But they also boost rent prices faster than a TikTok trend boosts a Stanley Cup. It's the urban equivalent of, we loved your raw authenticity so much that we brought in a craft brewery and tripled your lease. Thanks, I guess? Critics pointed out that some VMF murals ended up in areas where residents were already being priced out, displaced, or pushed into invisibility by revitalization efforts. And while the festival's heart was often in the right place, the reality is that even the prettiest paint job can't cover up a city's affordability crisis. In some cases, People felt that murals were being used as cultural smokescreens, a bit of rainbow wash distraction, while developers quietly flipped the block. Then there's the issue of who gets to paint what and where. There were some spicy debates about artist selection, land use, and whether putting a mural on stolen land without indigenous consent is actually public art or just another layer of colonially sanctioned gloss. Spoiler, it's complicated and not in the cute Instagram status way. Add to that the corporate sponsorship conundrum. Look, we get it. Murals cost money and art doesn't pay for itself. But when public walls start featuring logos or brand-friendly messaging like Vibe Responsibly, things get a little cringe. There's a fine line between community celebration and branded content, and sometimes that line gets blurred faster than a mural during a rainstorm. And let's not forget, artists aren't vending machines. There were real conversations about fair pay, creative control, burnout, and what it means to be an artist in a city where exposure is offered more than actual money. Some creators called out tokenism, or being invited to contribute after the community was already in the process of being sanitized. You can't just slap a mural of a resistance icon on a condo and call it reconciliation. So yeah, VMF wasn't without its issues. But here's the thing, those challenges didn't discredit the movement, they made it more real. Because public art should be messy, debated, questioned, and constantly held accountable. And to VMF's credit, many of these criticisms weren't ignored. They became part of the dialogue, part of the evolution. Because in a city that changes faster than your landlord's rent justification, it's not enough to paint over the cracks. You've got to name them, challenge them, and maybe turn them into a mural with teeth. At this point, if you're still thinking the Vancouver Mural Festival was just a one-and-done summer paint sesh with someone's cousin DJing off an iPhone in an alleyway, you clearly haven't been paying attention. Because what started as a bold week of murals quickly turned into a full-blown urban culture movement, minus the corporate cringe, most of the time. VMF didn't just pop up once a year to make a few walls pretty and bounce. It evolved into a year-round, city-shaping juggernaut with the energy of a TED Talk, a block party, and a group art therapy session rolled into one. Yes, there were murals, but also workshops, live performances, panel discussions, guided art walks, pop-up galleries, and dance floors so vibey, they made your Spotify Discover Weekly feel underprepared. Let's talk about the block parties for a sec. If you've ever wondered what it's like to dance under a 6-story mural while someone's aunt is selling empanadas and a DJ spins house music from a bicycle-powered sound system, this was the place. These weren't your average local art scene events with lukewarm wine and polite clapping. These were full, sensory, community-charged celebrations with enough diversity, talent, and cultural flex to make you believe Vancouver actually has a personality. But VMF wasn't just about vibes, it was about access. The festival created platforms for emerging artists, paid artists, yes, paid, not in exposure or Instagram likes, but in actual currency, and made sure their art was out where people live, not locked in some gate-kept gallery, only open from 10 to 4 on weekdays. And let's not sleep on the programming. Throughout the year, VMF hosted artist residencies, mentorship programs, speaker series, and creative collabs across disciplines from muralists to musicians, sculptors to storytellers. The festival tapped into Vancouver's art scene like it was running on a giant rainbow-colored Wi-Fi signal and said, "Cool, now let's make it louder." Even during panini times, aka the pandemic, VMF adapted like a queen. Socially distanced art tours? Check. QR code activated murals with audio narratives? Absolutely. Virtual panels discussing decolonization, art activism, and public space? On brand and on point. They took the pivot concept and turned it into a full-blown pirouette in Air Force Ones. By establishing art as both experience and infrastructure, VMF did what most institutions only pretend to do: it democratized culture. It let people engage with art between grocery runs and work shifts without needing to whisper in a gallery or pretend to understand brushstroke symbolism. It built trust with communities and challenged what legitimate art looks like. Spoiler: sometimes it's a giant pigeon holding a protest sign and it still slaps. So yeah, VMF wasn't just a festival, it was a whole cultural reboot. It turned art into a lifestyle, neighborhoods into canvases, and Vancouver's concrete into collective expression. And even if you didn't notice it happening, that just proves how deep it got. So, plot twist. In 2023, the Vancouver Mural Festival announced it would be stepping away from its massive annual public festival format. Cue the collective gasp of every art kid, mural, tourist, and guy who only ever used the murals as Tinder photo backdrops. Was this the end of Vancouver's artistic hot girl summer? Not quite. But it definitely marked the end of an era and the start of something weirder, quieter, and potentially even more radical. First, let's pour one out ethically into a reusable water bottle for what VMF was: a citywide creative banger that turned gray walls into full-blown cultural icons. But unlike your favorite band that broke up for creative differences and never spoke again, VMF didn't ghost, it pivoted. They scaled back on the blowout, fireworks, block party energy, and focused instead on year-round programs, community commissions, and creating space for long-term, intentional art making. And honestly, that might be exactly what the city needs. Because if the festival's first chapter was about painting big and loud, the next one is about going deeper, about collaborating more with community groups, indigenous leaders, and hyperlocal artists, about ensuring that murals aren't just photo ops but acts of placemaking and resistance. Because let's be real, Vancouver doesn't need more hype, it needs more heart. And the legacy? Oh, it's very much alive. Walk down any block in Mount Pleasant, the West End, Chinatown, Strathcona, even out in North Van or beyond, and the murals are still there, still bold, still brilliant. Still reminding you that this city has layers, like an onion or a very woke lasagna. They tell stories of joy, grief, protest, healing, identity, and a wild amount of local bird species. More importantly, VMF's legacy lives in the fact that Vancouver now sees its walls differently. What used to be a background is now a conversation. Blank space isn't neutral anymore, it's potential, possibility, a subtle threat that someone might paint a giant neon cougar riding a skateboard and make you feel things about land justice. The festival also planted seeds, a whole ecosystem of muralists, curators, and art collectives who aren't waiting for permission to paint anymore. They've got ladders, a message, and paint cans louder than your neighborhood Facebook group, and they're coming for those walls, whether there's a press release or not. So what's next? Maybe VMF comes back with a new format. Maybe it goes hyper-local. Maybe it morphs into a decentralized art uprising fueled by mural kids, aunties, and urban crows. Whatever form it takes, the city's been changed permanently. Because the festival may be taking a break from the spotlight, but the walls are still talking, and they've got a lot left to say. Let's be honest, Vancouver's not exactly known for wearing its heart on its sleeve. It's more of a smile politely while silently judging your recycling habits kind of city. But thanks to the Vancouver Mural Festival, something unexpected happened. The city started speaking in color, emotion, and bold. Unapologetic art, and no, we're not just talking about that guy who chalks zodiac signs outside Whole Foods. The VMF didn't just slap murals on buildings and call it a day. It taught the city to see differently, to look up, to pay attention, to recognize that even the most ignored alley could hold a story, a statement, or a stunning piece of art that makes you do a double take mid-scroll. It transformed Vancouver's landscape from developer beige to emotional kaleidoscope, and in the process, made art something you didn't have to seek out, just something you had to notice. And sure, The big yearly festival might be on pause, but let's not get it twisted. The walls haven't gone silent. The murals are still out here shouting in brushstrokes, whispering in pastels, screaming in spray paint, reminding you that Vancouver is more than condos, cranes, and kombucha. They're the visual receipts of a movement that made public space actually public, that gave voices to those too often left out of gallery rooms and boardrooms, that reminded a city infamous for being too chill, that art can and should stir the pot. Because sometimes what this city needs isn't another pop-up wine bar. It's a 40-foot tall portrait of resistance staring you down on your way to brunch. The legacy of VMF is bigger than the festival. It's in the way young artists now know they can take up space, in the way communities can claim walls as mirrors, and in the way Vancouverites now expect art to show up in their daily lives, not just as decoration, but as dialogue. So, whether you're a mural lover, a casual commuter, or just someone who took a banger selfie in front of a neon octopus, remember this. The festival may have dimmed the stage lights, but the story's not over. The paint has dried, but the message is still wet. In Vancouver, the walls still speak. And if you're really listening, they're saying, this is just the beginning. And just like that, the city's pulse slows, but the story doesn't stop. You've been watching Izvi Imran's Star Video, where voices come together and the city speaks back. We're a crew, not a single face. A movement, not a moment. And every episode? That's built with you, for you, by all of us. From the seawall to the skyline, from underground voices to rooftop vibes, we're telling the stories that don't make the news, but make the neighborhood. If this episode hit, pass it on. Subscribe on YouTube, follow us on TikTok and Instagram, drop a comment, and tell us what your Vancouver sounds like. We're building this together, clip by clip, story by story. From 100 to 10K to wherever this takes us, when we get there, we all show up. So until the next drop, stay loud, stay collective, and stay in it. This is ISV signing off.